This video is brought to you by friend of the channel Squarespace. Stick around to learn more about how their intuitive website creation tools help people turn their hobbies into careers and dreams into reality. Hello and welcome to my Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom review. We're going to start with the most important question first. Is it good? Yes, it is absolutely fucking incredible. But in order to properly elucidate that point, I'm going to need to show you some things, and that brings us to the topic of spoilers. I'm very sensitive to people's concerns about spoilers for a game like this, so here's how I'm going to approach it. 2/3 of this review will be completely spoiler-free, as well as the conclusion. For these sections, I'm only going to use very early game footage, and I'm only going to speak about game mechanics and locations that you'd already be familiar with if you've been following any of the preview coverage or even just watching trailers. At a certain point in this review, I'm going to offer a big fat spoiler warning. It's going to be timestamped. There's going to be chapter options in the YouTube player. You won't be able to miss it. It's there that I'll discuss some of Tears of the Kingdom's surprises, new features and locations not seen to this point. It's also here that I'll talk about the dungeons or the temples or the divine beasts or whatever they're called, because I don't want to spoil that here in the intro. For these sections, I would say that if you are planning to play Tears of the Kingdom, don't watch these sections. Just trust me, I want you to experience the surprise the same way I did. But if you're on the fence about a purchase or you're just curious, I think some of the stuff in these sections might be what push you over the line towards handing Doug Bowser 70 big ones. I thought about excluding these sections from the review entirely, but I think they are central to why Tears of the Kingdom is so extraordinary, and so excluding them entirely would have left the review feeling incomplete. So, with that out the way, Tears of the Kingdom. Where to begin? I will say that I went into Tears of the Kingdom expecting something quite different. I saw the pre-release trailers, in particular the early ones setting up the story and tone, and I wondered if Tears of the Kingdom would be to Breath of the Wild what Majora's Mask was to Ocarina of Time. Majora's Mask took the existing mechanics and assets of the previous game, but remixed them to deliver a radically different vision of The Legend of Zelda, much darker and more haunting. In addition, the time loop mechanic had a profound impact on the way Majora's Mask played, an overarching game-wide mechanic that created a clear dividing line between Majora and its predecessor. Both games were genius in their own way, but it certainly isn't accurate to call Majora's Mask a sequel to Ocarina of Time. Tears of the Kingdom is not like that. It is absolutely Breath of the Wild 2. It is set in the same location, it lifts and drops many core gameplay systems like combat, traversal, paragliding, cooking, and more. Fundamentally, the core gameplay loop of these two games is very similar. New mechanics like the Ultra Hand build mechanic do provide an entirely new and wildly inventive way to explore and solve puzzles, but at the very core, Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild are similar in a way that Ocarina and Majora just weren't. I will admit that as I began exploring Hyrule again, I was a little bummed to see how familiar Tears of the Kingdom felt. Maybe for the first 5 or so hours I was like, oh, okay, well, we're doing this again, I guess. Okay, fair enough. It wasn't until I started to properly explore this new rendition of Hyrule that feeling of disappointment gave way to this ceaseless awe and wonderment and amazement and the realization that this world just doesn't fucking end. This game is unbelievably massive. An average clear time for Breath of the Wild was about 50 hours. I haven't spoken to a single reviewer who's cleared this in less than 70 hours. I think the average is about 80, and everyone who has finished it, myself included, feels like they have just scratched the surface of all the things you can do and see in this world. But Tears of the Kingdom's defining differentiator is not its size, it's its density. Breath of the Wild felt like a celebration of space and the serenity that comes from moving through it. Tears of the Kingdom is not built on the same philosophy. If this game is a response to any criticism of its predecessor, it's the criticism that Hyrule was too empty. This Hyrule is not remotely empty. It's like you can't run 50 meters in any direction without bumping into a new puzzle to complete, some item worth collecting, some secret cave full of treasures guarded by a secret boss, and on it goes. Not since Elden Ring has there been a game as big as this and as dense as this. That comparison really matters, I think. Where before we might have said that Elden Ring was influenced by Breath of the Wild, I think we can now say that Tears of the Kingdom and Elden Ring both feel like complementary companion pieces, each of them providing their own vision of infinitely dense and explorable game worlds, positively teeming with awe-inspiring discoveries. If there were things about Breath of the Wild that you did not enjoy and found frustrating, chances are all of those things are back here. Material collection, weapon durability, a lot of time spent traveling to and fro. Principally, that commentary that there wasn't enough legend in Breath of the Wild, that it felt too sandboxy and it didn't lean enough into the classic mythically inspired tropes of the series past. I don't think Nintendo have looked to address that feedback as much as some people might have liked, though there are some notable changes that do make this feel more legendary. Still, I found Tears of the Kingdom a far more powerful game than Breath of the Wild ever was, to the point where all of those previous complaints I had about Breath of the Wild seemed to just fade away here. At a certain point, I just came to the conclusion that Tears of the Kingdom is another one of those impossible games. Not in a difficulty sense, but in the sense that, like, it just feels impossible that human beings made this, and they did it in 5 years, and they got it to run on hardware less powerful than most modern day cell phones, and we get to carry this experience around in our pocket. It is a technological and artistic marvel that almost feels unfair amidst the current sea of patchy AAA releases. The Legend of Zelda series has always been Nintendo's creative crown jewel, and it shines more brightly than ever here in Tears of the Kingdom. I won't spoil the narrative setup for Tears of the Kingdom, but the game proper begins here on the Great Sky Isle. Link has once again been stripped of his strength and his equipment, and scantily clad he begins a new journey to save the princess, and in doing so, the world. The Great Sky Isle is analogous to the Great Plateau in Breath of the Wild. It is the starting zone that serves as the game's tutorial, introducing you to the game's fundamental systems like movement, climbing, combat, and resource gathering, as well as the newly added abilities, things like weapon fusing and the Ultra Hand build system. Still, it's a testament to the scale and density of Tears of the Kingdom that I spent around 3 hours in just this tutorial zone, experimenting with all the new tools at my disposal and exploring every nook and cranny here, because believe me, even though this is just a starter zone, there is a lot of stuff to find here. Eventually though, you are pushed from the nest, and as Link makes landfall, the Kingdom of Hyrule sits before him, familiar in many ways, but very different in others. The main difference you'll encounter at first is that Hyrule Castle, it's not looking so great. It's once again covered in ominous looking shit, only this time it's floating in the air. To make matters worse, Zelda is missing, and you immediately have a quest marker pointing you toward the first location that may hold clues to her whereabouts. Structurally, Tears of the Kingdom is quite similar to Breath of the Wild. There is an overarching objective to save Zelda and Hyrule, but the path you choose to take toward that objective is entirely up to you. As with almost every Zelda game prior, there are different regions of the map, each populated with different races and tribes, and each of them is in crisis owing to the same events that see the castle in ruins and Zelda missing. By helping to solve the problems of these people, Link will gain them as allies in his final battle against the evil that plagues Hyrule. But key to the structure is freedom, and it cannot be overstated the degree to which you can forge your own path here. You can immediately begin tackling those main quests in your adventure log, or you can just not. You can just go and explore every corner of the map, any corner you choose, any cave you find. You can find a way back up to the Sky Isles immediately and start exploring those. You can go to the deepest, darkest, most dangerous reaches of Hyrule from the very second you hit the ground. It's entirely up to you. It is a degree of freedom that few games would ever have the courage to offer, but it's offered here in Tears of the Kingdom, just as it was offered in Breath of the Wild. That freedom can be intimidating though, and it can see people wandering into places that they aren't quite ready for yet. More than a few people who played Breath of the Wild did so for a while, but in the absence of more structure and a more deliberate, curated pacing, those people kind of drifted away for various reasons, never finishing the game. It's a very common story for how many people engage Breath of the Wild. Structurally, I don't think Tears of the Kingdom offers many solutions here. It's still very freeform. Its pacing is dependent on how quickly you want to push events forward. You cannot rely on the game to grab you by the scruff of the neck and get you back on that main path. Nintendo obviously still wanted to retain that freedom to approach things however and whenever you please. Having said that, even though there are no structural changes here, I suspect that Tears of the Kingdom will hold many more people's attention for much longer, owing to its density. So much of Breath of the Wild was about moving through massive spaces, discovering old, abandoned ruins that might look impressive, but there really wasn't much that you could do with them. In Tears of the Kingdom, you can just strike out in almost any direction you like, and in no time at all, you will find something. A combat challenge, an enemy base, a dynamic world event that sees allied factions raiding a monster cave, an NPC offering a side quest, a lake with a little island in the middle, and a conveniently placed pile of building materials stacked nearby, subtly hinting that you may want to build a raft and go take a look. And that's just what's on the ground. When above you is this elaborate archipelago of floating islands, each of them their own space to explore, full of puzzles, secrets, treasures, and more. Just as a tangible example, I think a lot of the puzzle elements of Breath of the Wild were reserved for the shrines, which was a part of the game that met a pretty mixed reception. People felt like there were too many of them, that they reused the same aesthetic, so they were kind of boring, and they took ideas that could have been better utilized in things like the open world and in more classic style dungeons. Well, shrines absolutely make a return here in Tears of the Kingdom, and they're basically exactly the same as they were in Breath of the Wild, but there's so many extra puzzles to solve in the open world that you don't begrudge the shrines. You don't feel like they've soaked up a disproportionate amount of Nintendo's creative energy, because there's just so much creativity on display in the rest of Hyrule. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that Breath of the Wild's Hyrule was barren with nothing going on except shrines, because that's absolutely not the case. But if you go back and play Breath of the Wild after having played Tears of the Kingdom, that old rendition of Hyrule will feel very barren compared to what Nintendo have delivered here. That density both on the ground and above it fundamentally transforms the nature of this experience versus its predecessor. As I said in the intro, Breath of the Wild felt like a celebration of space, of serenity. Exploring Hyrule was a meditation of sorts. I don't think that feeling has been altogether abandoned here in Tears of the Kingdom, because you can still find that quiet, still, spacious beauty if you want it. But in addition to that, there's just so much to discover and do now. These main quest lines won't pull you along in a way that I think many people would have liked them to do, but Hyrule will. You will fall under its spell and tumble endlessly down its rabbit holes. I swear to God, one day, I'm like, I'm gonna finish this specific objective today. I won't spoil it. Literally 8 hours later, I hadn't done anything toward that objective because I found one thing in one location that set me on an 8-hour series of adventures through this world. A lot of the stuff I can't talk about now, I will come back to that in the spoiler block, but that is just the perfect example of what it's like to play this game. When it comes to things like narrative and storytelling, I'm sure people have many questions about how Tears of the Kingdom approaches it versus Breath of the Wild. I would say it's similar here. It's still about watching cutscenes of events happening in different places at different times, while Link is out there scurrying about on mountaintops. It's a less potent form of storytelling since it lacks urgency, but urgency would have been fundamentally incompatible with this experience because of how much premium is placed on freedom and exploration. That thing we all complain about where some earth-shattering event transpires and then the main character takes a load off and plays a round of cards or goes fishing or whatever. This flashback-style storytelling approach sidesteps all of that, but yeah, it does make Link, and by extension you, feel very distant from events. Still, I do think it's a more powerful narrative this time around. I really did buy into a lot of it, and there were certain moments that were so incredibly well done that I yelled at my television. I was just like that excited for real. This game is absolutely capable of that, and how many games can you say that of, right? Regardless, I don't think the storylines of Zelda games have ever been nearly as powerful as the stories that we write as we lead Link on his journey, and no Zelda game prior to this has provided such an incredible tapestry on which to transcribe your own epic. The characters you'll meet here and the problems you'll solve for them are going to impress you, but they won't hold a candle to the relentless sense of possibility and discovery that awaits you every time you step off that main path and into the unknown. Conventional wisdom would have you believe that immersive sims don't sell. Well, this one's about to sell 30 million copies. Okay, so let's rewind for a second. What the hell am I talking about? Breath of the Wild had a number of abilities you could use to manipulate your environment in interesting ways. Magnesis allows you to pick up and move metal objects. Stasis allows you to store and release kinetic energy. Remote Bomb lets you conjure a bomb at will, and Cryonis let you freeze things. All four of these abilities had a central functionality that you could use to create a variety of outcomes. So yeah, you could pick up a big metal slab and use it to create a bridge over a gap, but you could also drop that metal slab on an enemy's head. You could use Cryonis to create a stepping stone over water, but you could also use it to create obstacles that would flummox enemies. Point is, these abilities all had utility across puzzle solving, exploration, and combat, giving you a variety of ways to approach challenges rather than relying on lock and key style solutions every time. There would have been a strong argument to make that Breath of the Wild was an immersive sim, a genre of game defined by its focus on flexible abilities that allow you to solve problems in a variety of ways. Still, there were constraints in place that always made things feel like you were coloring inside the lines. You could be creative, but it was rare that you could go beyond the limits of what Nintendo's designers had envisaged for each puzzle. All of those constraints completely gone here in Tears of the Kingdom, just ripped away, leaving this game a totally freeform sandbox ready to be utterly broken by the new abilities that Nintendo has given to you. It sounds like a stretch, but it's not, I promise you. It is the central genius of this game, and it is something no other game has ever provided on the same scale. No other game has given you a sandbox this flexible, this responsive, this breakable, while still being a, actual video game rather than a sandbox style experience built for mods or whatever. Starting with the least impactful ability first, Recall. Recall is very clever. It rewinds the motion of almost any non-living thing. Time around that object continues to flow forward. The object itself flows backwards. You'll often use this to get up high since there's a lot of rocks falling from the sky aisles, and recalling them is a great way to get some quick elevation. But yeah, during combat it's also really nice since enemies will often hurl things at you and you can send them right back at them. Recall is actually most useful as a sort of undo key, since you're going to spend so much time building stuff in this game, and a lot of that stuff can fall off cliffs or start rolling away from you or whatever. Recall is a nice way to catch things that are getting away from you, so in many ways it's actually more a quality of life feature than anything else, and it's a very smartly implemented one at that. Ascend. Okay, here we go. Ascend is a move that lets you go up through ceilings, through cave roofs, through platforms, through fucking anything. For real, if it is a flat surface and it's not too far above your head, you can use Ascend to push up and through to the level above you. Its application in exploration is obvious. Areas that looked completely inaccessible now become very accessible, so long as you can get underneath them. In combat, it's also quite helpful. It allows you to change elevation quickly, and it's even used in a number of boss encounters where the boss puts themselves beyond reach, but for your ability to ascend up to them. As cool as this ability is, I really feel bad for Nintendo's level designers who had to contend with it. You can see in so many of the more curated locations how hard these designers have worked to make sure that you cannot use this ability to skip or break the game. They space out areas, they raise the height of ceilings so the ability doesn't work, they angle roofs, they do everything they can. But it doesn't matter, because if you are determined, you will always be able to use this ability to circumvent the level designer's intent. I have skipped massive sections of curated environments using this ability. I have looked upon elaborately laid out puzzles full of well thought out components and thought to myself, fuck that. Finding some cheesy little corner of the roof I can use, or building a platform to get me closer to the roof, or building a jetty out over piping hot lava that would allow me to reach a roof I shouldn't be able to stand underneath. I'm not showing many of the examples here because I don't want to spoil how I solved a lot of these puzzles, but yeah, Ascend would absolutely be considered a game-breaking thing in almost any other game. But here it fits so well within the overall design ethos of a game centered on allowing players to solve problems however the fuck they please. Next up is Fuse. That's the ability that lets you combine items with your melee weapon, your shield, or your arrows. Now, originally, I'd thought that Fuse might help take the edge off a lot of the complaints about weapon durability. The hope was that because you could fuse items to your weapons, and because that process increased the item's durability, weapon churn would be reduced. That absolutely did not happen here. Weapon durability is still extremely low. Only now, high damage weapons don't really drop. High damage components drop, which can then be fused with low damage weapons to create high damage weapons, but these weapons still have very low durability. So in many ways, Fuse has actually made weapon churn worse since it's added more steps to the process. We'll talk more about this later, but Tears of the Kingdom is still plagued by many of the quality of life issues that plagued Breath of the Wild, and sadly, Fuse does not help. However, Fuse is an exceptionally useful ability in other aspects. The ability to fuse elementally charged substances to your weapons will give you instant access to a sword that freezes, arrows that set things on fire, electrically charged shields that will shock an enemy who strikes you. Many foes have elemental weaknesses, and if you find yourself in the lava zone fighting lots of lava enemies, just create a water sword out of some blue choo-choo jelly and a rusty broadsword, and it will absolutely dumpster those foes. Where Fuse gets really interesting though is in the ability to fuse zonai devices. Zonai devices are mechanical contraptions that will do a thing. Fans, flamethrowers, water hydrants, laser beams, rockets. You can just attach any of those to your weapons or shield. You want a flamethrower shield? You can have one whenever you like. You just attach a flamethrower to your shield, boom, done. You want to attach a laser beam to your sword? Go for it, go for your life. This stuff is all helpful in combat, but it's actually even more helpful in puzzle solving and traversal. Attaching a rocket to your shield allows you to get instant air, allowing you to skip a huge number of traversal challenges, including those in curated spaces. Just as I was able to use Ascend to get to places I wasn't supposed to, I could do exactly the same thing with Fuse, using Zonai devices attached to my weapons or shield to completely sidestep the intended solution for certain challenges. As impressive as all these abilities are, they are just the entrees, and now it is time for the main course. Ultra Hand. Fuck me, I cannot believe that Nintendo added this to their game. It is total madness. So, Ultra Hand at its most basic level lets you pick up and connect things together. Put 2 logs together side by side and you've got a raft. Put 2 logs end to end and you've got a really long log. Put 5 logs together and you can pretty easily get to places that were probably meant to be much harder to reach. To properly do this feature justice and demonstrate its full capabilities and applications, this YouTube video would need to be like 2 hours long and only talk about this one feature. It is insane what you are able to do in any moment, creating all manner of basic structure allowing you to explore and solve puzzles with a degree of freedom that just seems absurd. And it becomes even more absurd when you start combining raw materials with Zonai devices, allowing you to create boats, hovercraft, off-road four-wheel drive vehicles, aeroplanes, hot air balloons, motorcycles, like you name it, it's insane. At a macro level, this massive world exists to be explored, and in Breath of the Wild, you generally had to do that on foot, or on paraglider, or on horseback, or maybe surfing your shield. Now, that exploration can happen however you want. If you see something off in the distance, you can build a plane and just fly there. Like, think about that. Think about what that level of choice does to the way you approach the very concept of exploration and puzzle solving in a game. It's no longer about what can I do, it becomes about what do I want to do. At the top of this section, I said that Tears of the Kingdom is an immersive sim. I know not everyone will agree with that categorization, arguing that there are a bunch of preconditions to that label that Tears of the Kingdom doesn't meet. For me personally, the defining characteristic of an immersive sim is not its perspective or its setting or whatever, it's the existence of a world built on a rule set that is consistent and flexible enough that it invites a variety of approaches to problem solving, while also giving the player a range of tools broad enough to be able to engage that world through the lens of logic and creativity, rather than through singular solutions or rote learning. That is the founding principle on which the immersive sim was built with the likes of Deus Ex, and there is no single video game I have ever played where I have felt like I've had more freedom to fight, explore, and solve puzzles however I chose to than Tears of the Kingdom. There is just nothing else quite like this, and I don't think there will be anything like this for a long time to come. Tears of the Kingdom is remarkable, but it isn't perfect, and certainly one issue that I expect many people will have with it is that it doesn't go far enough to address criticism of Breath of the Wild, and in some instances, it actually takes those grievances and makes them worse. For me, combat was never great in Breath of the Wild, and I think it's equally middling here in Tears of the Kingdom. The fundamentals of combat have been lifted and dropped from the previous game. Weapon swings and combos, weapon types, charge moves, bow attacks, the dodge mechanic, etc. It's all back and none of it has been enhanced. Each combat encounter still feels like this very awkward dance with your foe where you both take turns swinging at each other with these very stilted animations and very little in the way of hit feedback. Given how deep and flexible Tears of the Kingdom's mechanical sandbox is, its combat sandbox feels very one-note and unsophisticated by comparison. It is perfectly functional, don't get me wrong, but it's not great either, and I think it's made worse by the tuning of things like weapon durability and enemy damage output. So the weapon durability discourse has always felt very unnecessary to me because I've always thought that this is a good system, a worthwhile system, but Nintendo just haven't dialed it in correctly. If you just took the edge off it, I think people would be mostly fine with it, but the ridiculously low fragility of most weapons made the system feel unnecessarily onerous. It's still onerous here in Tears of the Kingdom, and like I said, it's kind of worse because now you're spending so much time going in and out of your inventory to get a weapon, equip it, open a different inventory screen, scroll through to the thing you want to fuse, drop it on the ground, open up another menu, select the fuse ability, and then press Y to fuse it, making sure you don't accidentally fuse something else laying on the ground because that process is not reversible. If that sounds like it sucks, it's because it kind of does. Again, I like the concept behind this, but because weapons still break so quickly, this just becomes a massive pain in the ass. I'm not sure why Nintendo are so set on making this feel so onerous, But yeah, obviously they made a call here because weapon durability was easily the most controversial aspect of Breath of the Wild, and to basically double down on it here is, yeah, it's definitely a choice. Enemy damage output is also really dumb, I think. My playthrough was meandering. I did not beeline it. I did a lot of shrines. I upgraded my gear. I, wore items that buffed my defensive stats. Even then, I would be regularly two-shot by enemies, just like normal standard enemies that I'd find around the open world. And I'm like, what the hell? What's happening here? It's obviously intended to get me taking combat more seriously rather than just spamming buttons mindlessly, sure, but it just doesn't feel right, and it pushes me to the game over screen far more than I would have liked. It also saps my supply of food, and let me tell you, if there's one thing that still sucks, it's the way you prepare meals. You collect the food, you go to your inventory, you select the ingredients, you hold 5 of them in your hands, you toss them in a pot, wait for the animation to play out, close the pop-up, reopen your menu, and then do it all over again. There is no way to quickly cook more than one item. There is no cookbook that automates the cooking process. It's annoying, to be honest. You really put it off for as long as you can because needing to stand there for 10 minutes to cook a new batch of food is not fun. Again, Nintendo have put so much work into so many other parts of this game, the choice to leave the entire cooking system like it is obviously just that, a choice. But I'm unsure what they think this adds to the experience. These are some of the more pertinent examples of bugbears from the first game that return here in Tears of the Kingdom, and they speak to that point that I made earlier. This is Breath of the Wild 2. It is a bigger and better version of it, to be sure, but the core gameplay is still very much there. I do think Nintendo could have gone further to buttress some of its weaker systems like combat and smooth out some of the more onerous survival elements, but clearly Nintendo do not agree with that. As a result, I think there are going to be plenty of people who want to like this, but just as with Breath of the Wild, they won't be able to get past all of these little frustrations that slowly pile up over time. However, I do think there's going to be a bunch of people who didn't like Breath of the Wild, but who end up loving Tears of the Kingdom. Some of that will be owed to the density of the open world and the creativity inherent in things like Ultra Hand, and some of it will be because of some of the stuff that I want to discuss right now in the spoiler block. So this is your warning. If you do not want some new locations and mechanics spoiled for you, then please click ahead to the time shown on screen or in the YouTube playback bar. That will take you to the conclusion of the video, which will once again be spoiler free, but for now we are going to dive into some light spoilers. Okay, you ready? Here we go. To this point, you have seen Hyrule. In fact, you saw it in the previous game as well. You would have seen glimpses of the Sky Isles here in Tears of the Kingdom. This expansive archipelago of islands floating above Hyrule, host to hundreds of spaces to explore, puzzles to solve, and secrets to uncover. That this new skyward land exists was always the pitch for Tears of the Kingdom. The sky was always meant to be the star of the show. But we were all of us deceived, for there is another space, and it delivers an entirely different vision of what it means to explore the land of Hyrule, and that vision is no vision at all. What if I told you that in addition to the absolutely massive world of Hyrule, and in addition to the expansive, intricate Sky Isles, there is a third location right under your feet that is nearly as large as the entire overworld map of Hyrule? That underneath the green fields you first touch down on is a whole other world built on entirely different rules and hosting Tears of the Kingdom's most challenging encounters and some of its most worthwhile rewards. That place exists, and it is called the Depths. When I first discovered it, I was like, oh, this is a pretty big cave. It's pretty sick. It wasn't until I found multiple chasms leading down into this place that it suddenly dawned on me. This wasn't a cave or even a series of caves. This was one gigantic cavern, the same size as the world above. I mean, not quite the same size though, because certain sections are blocked off in a way that the overworld isn't. But even with this lost space, this is still an overwhelmingly massive expanse. You really can't hold in your mind just how big the overworld map of Hyrule is, even when you see it from the sky, because it's just too big. But to learn then that there is an entire subterranean world under that was basically the same size, I was just like, are you fucking kidding me right now? And it's not just its size, it's the darkness. The depths are an inversion of the exploration model that exists throughout the rest of the game. Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are both based on that question, what's over there? You use your eyes to see something that might pique your curiosity, and then you head toward it. In an absolute masterstroke, Nintendo asked, what if we took away the ability to see? The result is a blinding fog of war that you are forced to push into, never totally confident what you might find when you do so. Perhaps it leads to a light route, allowing you to illuminate the area. Perhaps it leads to one of the blocked off sections, making the depths feel both expansive and labyrinthine at the same time. Perhaps it's a boss guarding powerful armor or precious resources. Perhaps it's just more space, an unremarkable step towards your next discovery. Whatever it might be, you have no fucking clue what it is until you get there. The world above is a world of unknown knowns. It's full of things you can see, but you don't know what they are. The depths is a world of unknown unknowns, where the only way to find out what might be there is to go and see for yourself. This area also houses one of the best puzzles I've ever done in an adventure game. It houses one of the temples. It houses hideouts for an enemy faction. It is the means by which you'll enter one of the game's most important but seemingly impenetrable locations. It is just so much. And I'll tell you right now, I have finished this game and I reckon I have seen around 10 to 15% of what the depths has to offer, for real. It is remarkable, and I just cannot believe that Nintendo have done this. I just can't. I can't believe that in a game that was already doing and adding so much, that they also added this thing. It's unbelievable. One of the biggest questions that people have about Tears of the Kingdom is, does it fix the dungeon problem? For those unaware, Breath of the Wild copped a lot of flack for abandoning traditional dungeons in favor of divine beasts, which were aesthetically very similar to each other, and their puzzles and pacing didn't hold a candle to the classic Zelda dungeons we remember from the days past. I'll tell you right now off the top, I don't think Tears of the Kingdom solves this issue for anyone who was really hung up on it earlier, but I will say that what's here is a significant step up versus the divine beasts, and some of the temples are actually really good. Because that's what they're called, temples, and they're overseen by the sages. You'll visit each region complete with a really excellent set of pre-quests that get you on the path to the temple. You'll make your way to it by some spectacular means, descending into the deepest parts of the depths, or flying to the highest point in the sky, or pushing through an impenetrable sandstorm, and after that, you're there. The temples each look the part. No longer do they share a similar masonry and layout, they're instead now their own distinct locations with their own visual aesthetic. They do, however, still adhere to that lock and key approach that the Divine Beasts had. There are 4 or 5 switches hidden throughout the temple. Throwing those switches will open a central chamber, allowing you to face the final boss. The quality of these temples vary greatly. Some of them are, frankly, pretty disappointing. Small in scale, easy puzzles, very anticlimactic boss encounter. I actually did the least impressive temples first, and yeah, I was very much like, oh man, they really didn't nail it here. But I do think the lightning and fire temples are much stronger, and the fire temple in particular is rather excellent. Still, no one will walk away from Tears of the Kingdom saying that the temples were their highlight. Part of that is to do with the rest of the game being so much stronger and more interesting, and part of it is because these temples still fall short of the mark. This is another strange holdover from Breath of the Wild. I mean, weapon durability was controversial, but everyone could agree that the Divine Beasts weren't it. Everyone wanted those old school dungeons, and Nintendo seemed to have gone halfway here, in a game where they've gone the whole hog in so many other areas. Nintendo feels mercurial at the best of times, but looking at the list of Breath of the Wild feedback that they responded to versus ignored is a puzzling read, and you have to wonder why they made the interventions that they did while leaving other things alone. So I do feel as though some gains have been made here, but the wait for those classic Zelda dungeons is not over. To this point, I have not spoken about performance on the Nintendo Switch, so let me do so now. Look, is it bad? No, it's not. By and large, Tears of the Kingdom runs pretty well and maintains an overall solid frame rate. It's a pretty good 30 FPS most of the time. You will absolutely see frame drops though, particularly when building and when a lot of particle effects kick in. In addition to that, there are certain parts of the game where the frame rate is just straight up ass, conjuring up memories of Blight Town from Dark Souls back in the day. It's not quite that bad, but it's in that territory where you're like, oh man, that's not good. Would it be nice if those things didn't occur and Tears of the Kingdom ran at a solid 30 or a buttery smooth 60? Absolutely, of course, and I'm sure many people will fixate on that fact over the coming days. But minor frame drops are not the technology story that I think we should be telling when it comes to Tears of the Kingdom. The real story is How the fuck can the Nintendo Switch run this thing? This is a beautiful looking game. Its draw distances are some of the farthest you will see in any open world game you will play. In an instant, you are able to shoot up in the sky to surveil a massive stretch of the world beneath you, being able to clearly identify landmarks from a tremendous distance. There are no loading screens at any point except when booting up cutscenes, and you will not believe this, but this is true. The total install size for this video game? 16 gigabytes. Mate, 16 gigabytes is the size of a save file for most AAA games these days. And you're going to tell me you've managed to get this game running on a 10-year-old chipset on hardware thinner than a small stack of beer coasters, and it only takes up 16 gigabytes of hard drive space? That is what I meant when I said at the top that this is a technological marvel, and that is the story that I think deserves to be told far more than the occasional frame drop. Just as Tears of the Kingdom is a technological marvel, it's also a design marvel. This is easily one of the most sophisticated games ever created. This sandbox, how this works, I don't know how Nintendo have pulled this off. I just don't. It's such a unique offering, and it will remain unique for a long time to come. You can easily recreate the vibe of these modern Zelda games, like space and grass and a bit of piano in the background, and you're halfway there. You can easily create a game as big as this, and many other games have done so and will in the future for sure. But I can't see anyone recreating this sandbox anytime soon. I just can't. The effort and cost it would take to recreate this would be beyond the reach of almost any studio, any publisher, including the big ones. We better enjoy Tears of the Kingdom because we are not getting another game like this for a long, long time. Luckily, there is plenty of it to enjoy. The scale of this world feels infinite, and the ways you can interact with it feel equally infinite. From a replayability perspective, no two playthroughs of Tears of the Kingdom would ever be remotely the same. Hell, even the way that two people solve the same puzzle aren't likely to be remotely the same. Such is the strength of the tools that Tears of the Kingdom provides, and the resilience of this world to withstand them. Tears of the Kingdom will overawe you with its scale and its imagination. It will demand your creativity and ingenuity in a way that few games would dare demand. It pays tribute to the things that have made this series so timeless, while also innovating so relentlessly that it'll be the better part of a decade before any game is able to follow in its wake. It is just a breathtaking high point for the Zelda franchise, for Nintendo, and for video games. I very strongly recommend The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. Every day, I feel lucky to do what I do. I was working a job I wasn't loving and eventually tried my hand at content creation. It worked, and all these years later, here I am. I was lucky for a lot of reasons, but one of the big reasons was that YouTube existed, and so there was this platform for me that I could use to turn my dream into a reality. What if the website you need to turn your hobby into a career doesn't exist? What if you want to sell the ceramics that you make or photos that you take? What if you want to provide physiotherapy to people in your local area or promote a stall you run at a weekend farmer's market? Whatever you want to do to build a business, having a website is generally going to be very helpful, and there's no better place to build a website than Squarespace. Squarespace offer intuitive but powerful website creation tools. Never made a website before? Then Squarespace is for you, letting you customize their beautiful templates in no time. Already feel pretty comfortable with web creation tools and want more advanced functionality? Well, Squarespace is for you too, with features like SEO, plugins for numerous payment platforms, a schedule tool allowing clients to book appointments, as well as detailed analytics allowing you to track how your website is performing. Since 2003, Squarespace has been helping people turn their dreams into reality. So if there's a passion that you'd like to make a career, then check out Squarespace for free by visiting squarespace.com. And when you're ready to get serious, use offer code SKILLUP at checkout for 10% off your purchase of a domain name. Thanks Squarespace for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.